Hey, welcome. Thanks for joining us. I'm Pastor Travis Ferguson of Christ Lutheran Church, and tonight I'm being joined by Dr. Mark Brouker, who is the founder of Brouker Leadership Solutions. The topic tonight is leadership, specifically servant leadership. And Dr. Brouker definitely has a lot of experience in that. He completed a 30-year career in the Navy, which began with him as a pharmacist. Throughout his career, he held various different leadership positions, going on to be the only pharmacist in the history of the Navy to hold the position of commanding officer of a Navy hospital. Welcome tonight, Mark. We're glad to have you.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited. Well, I guess what I just tell you about my journey with the servant leadership is what happened in a nutshell is I got selected to be commanding officer of Naval Hospital Brouker. As a family medicine teaching hospital. It was an amazing job, and I was actually shocked when I got selected to do that. Up until about 3 days before the ceremony, the Navy has these very formal ceremonies, change of command ceremonies. Anyways, about 3 days before that, I couldn't sleep. People probably have these thoughts of I'm not ready for this job, and I really was not ready. And I was tossing and turning. I woke my wife up, Chris, and she said, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, I can't sleep. Yeah, that's obvious, but why?" I said, "Well, hon, I don't know how to run a hospital." And she had this look on her face like only a wife could give a husband. And she actually, I think she said, "You're telling me we're 3 days away from this thing, you don't know what you're doing." And that wasn't really overly dramatic. I knew some rudimentary skills of hospital operations, but I was not qualified to be in that job. And she told me, she said, "Mark, be the best leader you can be, and we'll see what happens." And when she said that, it made me think of all the great leaders I had worked for, and they were all servant leaders. And these people knew me, they listened to me, they took care of me, they genuinely cared for my well-being. And they were the best servant leaders that I knew. And that's what I did. While I didn't know how to run a hospital to this day, I still don't know how to run a hospital. I do now understand the power of servant leadership. I just took care of my people as best I could, and we were very, very successful. So it was a profound experience of the power of servant leadership.
Awesome. So would you say that you got most interested in leadership when you were taking command of that hospital, or had you always been interested, had it always been in the back of your mind?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's always been in the back of my mind. I've always been intrigued with how to get people, excited about coming to work. It was always just always intrigued me. And this to me was almost like the ultimate experience of how do you get people excited to come to work. And I thought about great leaders that I had worked for, and they all seem to be servant leaders. And of course, my Christian faith, Jesus being the ultimate, servant leader, it just seemed like the only way I was going to survive that job was to be the best servant leader I could be.
Awesome. So you mentioned that, you had a whole lot of servant leaders to look up to. Thinking back specifically, who would you say was most impactful, that maybe mentored you most or led you most during your Navy career?
I've been thinking about that because I anticipated that question. And truthfully, I can't say one person, but there were so many great servant leaders that I had worked for, chiefs, people even that worked for me. I think that's where I learned a lot about leadership as non-commissioned officers, and you know what a non-commissioned officers, they're actually they're lower ranking than I am technically. But I watched how they interacted with the young sailors, and they just seemed to take care of them. And when they took care of them, these young men and women worked really hard for them. So they set a very good example of servant leadership for me, and I'll never forget that. The way they treated their sailors, we call them in the military, and it was very impactful.
So you saw that they were taking care of them, and that those sailors were responding, and
Exactly.
that really made an impact.
Yeah, it really did. It really did. It was magical almost. And when you read about leadership, and I've done a lot of research on it the last 20 years, it is really a magical touch, and it is very mysterious. It's fascinating.
Great. So you spent 30 years in the Navy, correct?
Yes.
And after transitioning out of the Navy, you worked for a while in different jobs before founding Brouker Leadership Solutions.
Correct.
And I'm guessing in this time of the 30-year career and now teaching, because you're also a guest professor, adjunct professor for Chapman University.
Yeah, very good.
I do my research.
I was going to say, you're very good.
Hey, in the Air Force, I'm on the chair all day, so just researching. Where have you seen leadership at its best in your career?
Yeah, that's another good question. I guess the last job I had in the Navy, from the job of commanding officer, I was moved here to San Diego. I was in San Diego. I was chief of staff for about 10 hospitals, the west coast of the Indian Ocean. And my boss was a one-star admiral, Admiral Faison. The guy he went on to be the Surgeon General of the Navy. He was that talented. And I worked for him, and I was very intimidated working for an admiral because, that's a lot of power and prestige. But he was just a great guy. He always asked me about my family. He knew a lot about me as a person. He took care of me, and I worked really, really hard for him, and the whole staff did. And we were extremely successful in that region. The Navy is basically broken into two regions around the world, east of the Mississippi and west of the Mississippi. We had everything west of the Mississippi, and we just did really, really well because of his tremendous leadership. He was a great servant leader.
And him knowing you, taking a vested interest in the people under his command, really inspired you guys to want to work for this guy.
That's exactly right. I couldn't say it better myself. Exactly right.
So you've had great experiences with leaders. I'm guessing you've also seen some not so great experiences with the people that you've worked with, maybe even some bosses that you've had. Would you mind sharing those with us?
Yeah, well, I mean, probably the most challenging leader I work for, the truth is this, is when people, unfortunately, one of the most popular questions I get, people come up to me after my seminars and say, I work for a person who doesn't espouse what you talk about, basically bad leaders. And I tell them, I say, you're getting an MBA in leadership studies because you're seeing exactly what doesn't work, and you will not do what they're doing because you see how hurtful it is. So I had one of those leaders, and if you watch him with the leg story, my TED Talk, and that's one of the persons that I think about. It just was a micromanager, disrespectful, try to control things, and everything you should not do as a leader. What I tell people is, at the end of the day, you don't really control anything. I mean, unless you're, like for us in the hospital, unless you're in the emergency room on a Friday night at 3 o'clock in the morning or Saturday morning, you don't know what's going on. The only thing you can control are your behaviors. And when you behave in a caring manner, that just spreads like very well down the chain of command, and people will feel comfortable and relaxed and will do their job very well. So I learned that, I could say honestly, to answer your question, I learned more about leadership. I worked for bad leaders because I knew what I should not do. I mean, you probably have the same experience. You're smiling, I'm thinking you have somebody in mind.
Yeah, this is not the place or the time for me to share that, though.
But we had lunch that time, and we did share. We didn't mention any names, but we both shared stories of people that there wasn't the most stellar leadership. But again, you and I both shared that we learned a lot from those people.
100%, and like you mentioned, it's almost as though we learned more from the bad leaders for what we don't want to do later on in our own lives, our own careers, in our own families, watching those mistakes. You mentioned, though, and I've heard you say this before, and I absolutely love it, because I think anyone who would talk about leadership in a positive way would say the exact same thing. The only thing that you're in control of is your own behaviors. So in thinking about that, what would you say are the non-negotiable behaviors for a really positive, a really good, a really forward-thinking servant leader?
Yeah, that's a good one. And I would say listening. In respect, I guess the bigger picture is respect. You must, as a servant leader, you must respect your people, show respect. And I think the best, easiest, and people, that's a big, what does that mean? Tell me what that looks like. And what that looks like, you listen with your heart. And when I thought back, I just wrote something on this a couple weeks ago, is I remember, and it's hard to quantify this, but I know in my heart, the more I listened, the more influence I could wield over people. Not that, it sounds Machiavellian influence, but at the end of the day, you're trying to get people excited to come to work. You're trying to get them to go above and beyond what they think they can do. And what I noticed, and there's no studies to support this, it's hard to measure, but I noticed, like myself, when I listened to people, and they knew I was listening to them, listening with their heart, showing concern for their concerns, and empathy and all that good stuff, they worked harder for me, which means I influenced them more. So to me, it's listening. If you listen really well to your people, and they know you're listening, there's some people who listen, but they're looking on their cell phone. That's not listening. I mean, listening with your heart. You can influence those people a great deal. So listening, I think, would be the non-negotiable.
So I wasn't planning on asking this, but I think it's such an important aspect of leadership, that listening. So how do you actively listen? How do you personally? I mean, I've been in several conversations with you, and I have to be honest, I think you're the best listener in the world. Like, I feel like I'm the only one in the room when you're talking, or when I'm talking and you're listening. So what goes through your mind as you're actively listening?
Well, I gotta tell you, that's a nice compliment, because I don't think I listen well. I think what some of the things I end up doing is I think of what I'm going to say before you're speaking. So I listened to one person told me that assume you have nothing else to do. When I'm listening to you, I've got nothing else to do. I just have to listen, and don't think of what you're going to say. Just listen. One job I had in the Navy that got me good at this is I was a detailer. I was one of these guys who got people to be excited to move from literally Hawaii to Iceland with their family. And I had to listen to them, because you really do have to listen deeply. It is a phone call, so I couldn't see the body language. But I learned, someone told me, said, and this job is a 3-year job, it's a great job, moving all these people around the world. But I had to really listen to them. And that was the key to that success. So that helped me understand the power of listening. So what I try to do is I try desperately not to think of what I'm going to say, and I try to keep reminding myself that I have nothing else to do right now. And I hope Chris, my wife, is watching this. I think she might disagree with how well I listen, but that's another story.
Well, I think our wives would 100% agree on that for both of us. But I love what you say. Treat it as though you have nothing else to do. And it's kind of the difference between an Eastern mindset and a Western mindset. Is for many of us in the United States, and I'd say from my experience, a lot of commanders, a lot of leaders within the military are very time-oriented, because their days are so structured, they have so many things to do. And so if you can't spout out what you need to say in 2 minutes, they're done listening and you're kind of out the door. Versus this Eastern mindset of being very people-focused in conversations. And so I think that what you're saying is that we really do need to, we should still value the timepiece, but we need to value people over time. Yes. And as we value people, their lives will begin to change, which means our lives will begin to change, especially as leaders, because they're going to be all on board with following and with serving as well.
Yeah,
so,
well put.
Thank you. Even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while, right? So the next kind of 3 lightning round questions are related to, I think, everyone in our society, right, is a leader in some way. And I forget where I read this. I think it was from a Navy captain who was retired. He said, not everyone has authority, but everyone does have influence. So in thinking of that, what's the advice that you would give to someone who's on the lower level? So if we're thinking in the military, like E1, E2, E3, or we're looking at a grocery store, the cashier or the bagger, or a factory worker or whatever else, who would be typically called the blue-collar worker, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, it's the same advice. I mean, at the end of the day, you control your behaviors, and in more times than not, life is not fair. Not everyone's going to get noticed, but more times than not, I think it's safe to say, if you have a really good attitude at any job they give you, you give it 100%. And it's a Christian work ethic, I guess, but just give it 100%, and then treat everyone really well. Take care of your colleagues, I guess, instead of your people, the people who work for you. But more times than not, that'll lead to good things. The boss will notice, because your colleagues will be excited to see you because you're nice to them, and having a good attitude. Those are the 2 things. Just treat your colleagues really nice and have a good attitude. And you could be CEO of American Airlines and have those qualities and be successful, or you could be the grocer at Sprouts and have a higher likelihood of success. So it's not complicated. What's so frustrating to me sometimes is I've coached so many leaders who don't do that, and to me it's simple. I mean, it's just be nice to other people, have a good attitude. If you don't do anything else, probably good things are going to happen. But I don't know what happens with people that they miss those 2 common sense type behaviors.
Awesome. I think that's everything you're saying is golden. In looking at those mid-level managers, so those who they're not on the bottom level, they're not necessarily doing the grunt work, what you might say, but they're also not at the top. So they're taking orders from someone else, and everyone is taking orders from someone, right?
Yeah.
Even the CEO of American Airlines, as you mentioned, I guarantee he's taking orders from his wife, or she is taking orders from her husband. Either way, we're all taking orders from someone.
Yeah.
And you hit on this a little bit before, but how do you successfully function as that mid-level manager when you don't see those qualities of servant leadership coming down?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess if you're a mid-level manager and you work for someone who's a toxic leader, I guess is the best way to just to put it out there, is, it's hard to influence a toxic leader because usually they're arrogant, and arrogant people don't listen, the opposite of what we just talked about. You got to make a decision. If it's so stressful for your physical and spiritual, emotional health, you probably want to quit, frankly. And I told a lot of people, I said, you need to move on because it's hurting your health. I mean, the blood pressure's up, and so if you can grind it out, if you can just hang in there, you'll learn a lot. But there may be a health component to that thing. But one thing I just want to say for mid-level managers, I'm sure it's the same thing as being a pastor, and maybe not so much, but in the military, it's very competitive, and people are all vying for these few shot jobs, and people don't understand how competitive the Navy is. And for 30 years, what I didn't like about the Navy was all that competition. I saw people, backstabbing other people, and I just didn't like that. And by the grace of God, I, got through and got promoted. But what I tell people is try to make a decision thinking that you're at the terminal rank, I call it. You're not going to get promoted, because I saw people making decisions, important decisions, thinking, what's the boss thinking? What's the best thing for my career? That's not a good thing, because the people below you will see right through that most of the time. So I tell people, when you're making a decision as a mid-level manager, try desperately not to think that you're at the terminal rank. Don't let that politic piece into the decision-making process. Of course, that doesn't mean you're not going to go to the Christmas party with the boss and stuff like that and spend time with him and all that stuff you have to do, but try not to be influenced by that desire to get to the next rank. That can backfire very quickly.
I'm not sure if you know this, but when I first commissioned in the Air Force, it was 2014, and my plan was to get through seminary, because I commissioned as a chaplain candidate, to get through seminary, do my 2 years of parish work, and then go active duty.
Yeah.
And that was my life plan, right? And I had the hopes and dreams to be Major General Travis Ferguson, to be the chief of chaplains, right? That was my goal. And when I was at my first base, which I won't mention, as a full chaplain at this point, and I was a first lieutenant, so I had this nice silver bar on my uniform, which just meant that I was no longer a butter bar. I watched this chapel staff, and I saw that competition that you were talking about. And I saw a lot of people who were making decisions for their career rather than for the spiritual well-being of the base. And I remember being so disheartened by that, that I said, you know what, I think maybe staying in the reserves is the right plan for me. And so thank you so much for confirming that and how we should all be making decisions on that terminal rank level. I love it.
Yeah, well, that's hard to do. I mean, it's very hard to do, but it's interesting. We never spoke about it. It's like the third time we've spoken.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that story. And so anyway, it is hard, especially the higher up your rank you get. You see that next rank, or whatever. It's a civilian, the same thing, vice president of sales or whatever, and that can be very enticing. And it's just something you just desperately need to fight, because it is, we're sinners, we're all, we have jealousies, we have all those sins, but it's really hard. It was hard for me when I got that captain job. It was like, it was really hard not to think what's next and all this other stuff. So it was a great challenge.
Yeah, so you rose up through the ranks. Did you come in as a, what do they call it,
Ensign.
an ensign?
Yeah.
All right. So I don't know you Navy folk.
We had to be different.
Yeah. So you rose up essentially 6 ranks, and most people do not retire even after a 20-year career as a captain or an 06. You're at the top of before becoming an admiral, and that's a congressional approval and stuff, right? And even 06 is. So as you move throughout those roles, holding very different positions throughout that, you became the top guy. Well, the very top for your field. If you could give one piece of advice to yourself, looking back now, as soon as you first started, what do you think you would tell yourself as that top level manager or that top level director?
I guess going back to we mentioned this, I wish I'd listened better. I think I would have been more successful if I listened earlier. Won't go into a lot of detail, but we make mistakes in our career. I just think listening, it's funny, someone came up to me at a seminar, I don't know, not that long ago, and he was going on a Boy Scout retreat. And he goes, real quickly, I got to catch my flight, but I'm going on this Boy Scout retreat. What should I tell these Boy Scouts? What's one thing? And I said, I think, dude, you want to tell them to listen. These are 12, 13-year-old kids. I said, listen, there's so much wisdom out there from wise counsel. And if you could tap into that wise counsel, why wouldn't you get free advice from smart people, wise people, I guess is a better way to put it. So I just wish, I guess if I could do it all over again, I wish I knew these things earlier in my career. And that's why I love talking to young people about these, these things I learned along the way. I just through, the experience and whatnot. Because I know they're listening, they want to learn, and hopefully I can help them, not make some of the mistakes I made. So listening, I guess, is one thing I wish I had learned at earlier than in my career.
I wish I'd know that now. That'd be a good lesson for now for me.
Yeah.
So final question, kind of bringing all this together, because we're obviously at our church that we both attend, right? How do you see faith, or how did you see faith being important to you as you went up the ranks of leadership?
Yeah, I guess it became more important as I got up the ranks. There's no question. We all have our journeys through our faith. I've always been a Christian, but it waxed and waned, especially when I came out of college. But I did a talk, a little videotaping, I guess about a month ago, about an event on the comfort that had a kind of reawakening for me. This is in 1991. And that's when I started getting my faith back together again. And every rank I got up, because you get more responsibility, and especially in command, that was probably the most difficult job I've had. I prayed a lot more in that job than any other job. And I would wrestle in the middle of the night. I'm sure people do this today. I mean, you should probably do it. We all do it. Probably more in this COVID thing than we should. But I'd wake up in the middle of the night wrestling with a big problem. And I'd wrestle, literally maybe an hour. Finally, I'd say, wait a minute. Christ has this. And I would envision myself literally going to his knees and dropping this problem at his feet. And I'd go back to sleep. And I'd say to myself, why didn't I think of this an hour ago? I would have gotten an extra hour of sleep. So for me, faith that Christ is in control, that this all will turn out, and which it takes a lot of faith to just focus on behaviors, as we talked about. Most leaders think about the results. They focus on results. It takes faith to take care of your people and have faith that the good things will happen because of that leap of faith, I guess. So just knowing in a nutshell that Christ was in control when I had some issues cooking, I would literally, I wish I did it earlier, like I said, when losing all this sleep, but just drop it at his feet, knowing that he had it, and every time things turned out fine. So yeah, faith was probably, well, there's no question, was the most important piece of my leadership journey, that knowing that I was not in control of things, he was in control.
I think that message right there is a perfect way to end, that I'm not in control of, unless it's my behaviors, right? I'm in control of my behaviors, but ultimately Christ is there.
Yep.
I just want to thank you so much for taking this time to be with us today. I really appreciate it. For all of those watching, you can check out more about Dr. Mark Brouker at the website listed below. He's got a book coming out this fall, correct?
Yes, I do.
Yes, and there's already 2 copies sold. He bought one and I'm buying one. But we encourage you to stay up with that. This is a great guy. Make sure, if you're a member of our church, that you get to know him. Hope you have a great day, and take care.